Well, I'll be very brief. The session is titled Smart Ports, and I let me assure you that my panelists are deeply smart. As far as, of course, their professional knowledge, also as far as the time meeting is concerned, I do not intend to keep my a kind of a watch over there, but I leave it to their good judgment. The moment they find that the smart 20 minutes or 10 minutes, as we have discussed, will finish over. But suffice to say, coming back to the theme of the session, smart ports, I think everything is smart. As a matter of fact, we are all wearing things, we are carrying devices such as what we have ourselves is almost turning into digitalized devices. We are carrying so much digital world on ourselves, and we cannot even think about the ports not being so smart. Yesterday itself, I had a chance to go across to one of the ICT terminals here, container terminals, and the kind of, they've gone beyond automation. They're talking about hydrogen-based cranes. They're talking about autonomous gantry cranes. So it is moving towards that direction. But then, does it give us all kinds of comfort in the sense that it will become absolutely unmanned? That's again a wishful thinking in the sense that we need to have some kind of human element into it. Otherwise, technology will run away and create more problems for us, as it will accept a few things, it will just not accept other things. All right. Also, there is a question about, we have not got into the concept of ethics about it, about the AI, how far will it take us, the smart ports will take us. These are very, very important issues. So, I will keep my remarks at the end of the session, but I just want to give a teaser. While we are talking about smart ports, we have to be conscious. There are two more monkeys on our back. One is green. We're talking about carbon transitions. We're talking about carbon footprints. Ports contribute around 3% of the GHG. So that also has to become part and parcel, or the so-called ecosystem of a smart port. Third, the second monkey, as I call it, is climate change. It's been there, all right, in terms of resilience. We're talking about coalition for disaster reduction and initiatives. All these things are going to be there. Ports have to be highly resilient. And not to forget, cyber monkey is also nice. And this is all going to be add up a more complex, smart world that we are talking about, smart port that we are talking about. I hope some of my panelists will well on these issues, talk about green part of it, resilience part of it, of course smart they will. I'll stop here and I'm going to ask the first presenter, kindly. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for their financial support in making this dialogue possible, and also our dear partners and friends at CPPR. It's a pleasure to work with you again on this project. So oceans are obviously the lifeline of the global economy. There's trillions of dollars of goods that are traded by ports every year. And around 90% of global trade is processed through ports and through cargo ships. In India, 95% of the country's trade volume and 65% of its trade value is undertaken through its maritime port infrastructure. Ports are a regional multimodal intersections of global supply chains because they encompass complex interconnected infrastructures. They generate various types of business services and transactions, and they require specific types of legal regulation as well. Smart in this context relates both to the actual policies and logistical methodologies underlying the physical operation of ports. We go to the next slide, please. And the implementation of the latest digital technologies to optimise performance in a targeted manner. For example, the artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain, big data, cloud computing, geolocation, 3D printing, for example, for automated ship repairs, drones, which have the ability to track hard to reach places, and most importantly, perhaps 5G connectivity. 5G being 100 times faster in traffic and network efficiency than 4G, enabling the seamless interoperability of various Internet of Things devices in any sector. Smart ports development initiatives can be categorised into two different types of groups. The first is multi-purpose initiatives. So these are comprehensive and strategic long-term plans to optimise port infrastructure. These initiatives involve embedding key large-scale digital technologies to optimise large port infrastructures. The concerns relating to environmental sustainability and energy efficiency are normally considered multi-purpose initiatives within this group. Then the second is targeted initiatives. So smart port targeted initiatives aim to resolve specific obstacles in the port infrastructure. These projects are critically focused on ICT application and regulations-based approaches to developing smart ports. The latest digital technologies are essential to meet the demands for productive and data-driven operations, the management and the security of smart ports. This includes automated machinery, which can reduce the need for face-to-face interactions, particularly important during COVID-19. It's led to critical supply chain disruptions and port closures. It also includes intelligent infrastructure, which has real-time data collection, especially on import and export cargo release time, as a critical indicator of border port efficiencies. The data-driven nature of digital technologies enhances the objective operation of ports while ensuring the optimisation of energy utilisation and risk assessments towards environmental sustainability in the long term. The Joint Declaration on a Shared Vision for Maritime Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific between India and Australia recognises the need to assess various security risks against narcotics and illegal trafficking of goods. Ports are critical infrastructure for trade and vulnerable to various illegal activities or security risks, inclusive of cybersecurity risks, and we need to establish clear rules and collaborate to better assess and safeguard our ports. Next slide, please. The facilitation of traditional goods across borders has enabled the new form of digital trade or electronic commerce to flourish. But the economic environment for seamless cross-border trade in digital products also requires efficient traditional trade flows and mechanisms. Therefore, the logistical and administrative requirements to facilitate traditional trade will always remain critical for developing e-commerce activities in any particular country or region. Digital technologies can enormously simplify the four essential traditional trade processes of commercial transactions, trade finance, and transport, logistics, and official control measures by various governmental authorities. So UNESCO estimates that measures relating to trade facilitation, as outlined in the World Trade Organisation's Trade Facilitation Agreement, or TFA, so measures relating to transparency arrangements, formalities, institutional arrangements and cooperation, and transit facilitation, could reduce trade costs by 4%. 13% of trade costs will be reduced if these TFA measures and digital trade facilitation measures are adopted. So the most significant trade cost reduction will occur from partial or complete implementation of paperless and cross-border paperless trade measures, which go beyond what is required by the TFA. Paperless trade is a TFA plus obligation, which is one of the most important facilities of trade-led efficient port operations. And 78 jurisdictions, which encompasses almost all of the JSA or Joint Statement Initiative participants, have signed agreements that include a provision on paperless trading, which amounts to around 56 preferential trade agreements. There are various frameworks and model laws on paperless trading. These include the WCO Cross-Border E-Commerce Framework of Standards, the WCO Safe Framework of Standards to secure and facilitate global trade, the UN Electronic Commerce Convention, as well as, of course, the UNCITRAL Model Law on electronic commerce. UNESCAP estimates the average regional implementation of the paperless trade measures to be around 62%, with many developing countries having quite low implementation. Uri and Paleko identify 3 types of paperless trading provisions in preferential trade agreements. One in the trade in goods chapter, another as part of cooperation activities between parties, and a third under the electronic commerce chapter. The paperless trading initiative of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Blueprint for Action on Electronic Commerce requires customs authorities to facilitate an electronic environment that supports electronic applications. The provision in the CPTPP Article 14.9 contains a separate requirement for paperless trading, which applies to trade administration documents, but does not extend to an e-invoice or a letter of credit issued by a bank. On the other hand, the Singapore-Australia Free Trade Agreement, or SAFTA, contains a separate e-invoicing provision where the parties recognise the importance of electronic invoicing to increase the efficiency, accuracy and the reliability of commercial transactions. So SAFTA's paperless trading provision extends the scope of paperless trading disciplines beyond customs administration to all electronic records used in commercial trading activities between private enterprises. SAFTA's paperless trading provision covers other solutions as well for quicker customs procedures. It also contains a domestic electronic transactions framework provisions that requires parties to adhere to the UNCITRAL model law on electronic commerce. And SAFTA goes further by covering electronic transferable records. So a transferable record under the UNCITRAL model law on ETRs is a document or an instrument that's issued on paper that entitles the holder to claim the performance of the obligation indicated in that particular document or instrument, and to transfer the right of obligation, the right of performance of that obligation. So it's something like a cheque or a promissory note that entitles its bearer for payment of the amount that's specified in the record. Now, SAFTA requires the parties to consider the UNCITRAL model law standards on electronic transferable records and other international standards. And you can imagine how simplifying bills of lading and letters of credit vastly simplify the trading process. Now, one crucial aspect of the broader concept of paperless trade is e-authentication and e-signatures. Now, under SAFTA, electronic authentication means the process or act of verifying the identity of a party to an electronic communication or transaction and ensuring the integrity of an electronic communication. So e-authentication is a way of verifying the identity of a transaction party and ensuring the integrity of a e-communication. In contrast, an e-signature is usually used to indicate a party's intention to be bound by a particular transaction. So paperless trade mainly depends on e-signatures and the different forms of e-authentication that are used in electronic communications, being recognised legally in the jurisdictions of the parties to that transaction. Now, there are model laws that specifically cover electronic signatures, such as the UNCITRAL model law on electronic signatures and the UN Electronic Communications Convention. The UNCITRAL model law on electronic commerce also includes provisions stating that a communication or a contract's validity or enforceability shan't be denied solely because it's in electronic form. Now, more jurisdictions have provisions on e-authentication in their preferential trade agreements than on paperless trading, but fewer joint statement initiative participants have such provisions. So 87 jurisdictions or 66 JSI participants have signed preferential trade agreements that include one or more provisions on e-authentication and e-signatures. And mainly these provisions follow the requirements in the UNCITRAL model law on e-commerce. Now, it is as vital as paperless trade to have systems for e-payment, specifically for the e-commerce sector. And many countries are beginning to place restrictions on e-payment services like PayPal and the digital activities of traditional banks. So measures relating to the financial services industry are governed at the WTO under the GATS Annex on Financial Services, which is akin to the GATS Telecommunications Annex. But as expected with the current WTO rules, the Annex doesn't cover e-payments. It's more focused on clarifying what the right of members is to implement regulation for prudential reasons, so for example, governing financial markets. The UNCITRAL instruments don't cover e-payments, and the OECD recommendation of the Council on Consumer Protection and E-commerce, as well as the WTO TFA, does recommend that businesses provide consumers with easy-to-use payment mechanisms and implement security measures. But there's no provision concerning e-payments in the CPTPP. However, SAFTA does contain a provision, and DEPRA provides a similar provision on e-payments. Now, I want to talk about smart ports and smart tracking. So ports provide the actual physical infrastructure for it's used for goods to pass through the global supply chain. And shipping ports, as I noted earlier, with smart policies and technologies, are becoming smart ports. But the World Economic Forum notes that only 3% of the world's container terminals are automated, which indicates that there's still enormous potential for technological transformation in this area. UNESCO estimates the improvements to maritime connectivity would reduce trade costs in the Asia-Pacific region by 3 to 6%. IoT tracking devices can support smart port operations in many ways for efficient processing and result in reduced errors that are introduced by humans. Similarly, AI, optical character recognition, and blockchain can revolutionise port infrastructure and other operations for greater efficiencies in the future. We'll go to the next slide, please. So a coherent national strategy to develop cogent institutional and legal frameworks for governance of smart ports is critical. A well-integrated governance and institutional framework can resolve many of the challenges that India confronts to develop large-scale, multi-purpose smart port projects. Incentivising public-private partnerships to promote the required investment in the development as well as the management of new smart ports infrastructure is essential. The states alone can't fathom the multitude of challenges that are presented in trying to implement smart ports infrastructure. And there's a need to ensure that private organisations with the requisite knowledge and skills are invited to partner with the states in order to ensure that the new age smart ports are equipped with the latest technologies and the latest skills. So the current flagship project, the Savarma projects, the welcome initiative by the Government of India. It aims to promote port-led economic development. The project envisages renewal of old ports into smart ports, as well as initiating the development of megaports in India. The main ambition of this project is to reduce the logistical costs for EXIM and domestic trade in India with minimal infrastructure investment. Various sub-initiatives within the project aim towards building a digital port ecosystem that promotes cross-port interoperability within the nation, as well as to forge regional interconnectivity amongst key ports in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, India can utilise the international cooperation framework in the maritime cooperation in the India-Pacific with Australia to build strategic partnerships, to promote knowledge sharing and develop expertise which can resolve some of the key challenges that are confronted by India to further develop its maritime sector. Some of these challenges include disjointed institutional arrangements, the multiple agencies that are involved in the development of infrastructure, the development of major and non-major ports as separate, unconnected entities, weak infrastructure at ports and beyond, limited mechanisation, lack of scale, deep draft and other facilities at various ports in India, and insufficient infrastructure for evacuation from major and non-major ports, leading to a suboptimal transport modal mix, as well as limited interland linkages, which increase the cost of transportation and cargo movement, limited economic benefits to the region and to the community, and limited development of centres for manufacturing and economic activities in the hinterland, and finally limited conscious skill development and leverage to peripheral trades. Now, the India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement that was recently signed sets important rules on trade and services, as well as customs procedures and trade facilitation that are relevant here. The agreement highlights the importance of predictable, consistent, transparent and expeditious customs procedures and mechanisms for both parties. Article 5.7 specifically provides for an electronic platform for importers and exporters to exchange information through a single entry point or window, which specifically facilitates the flow of trade in goods or services between the two countries. Article 5.10 highlights the importance of cooperation between Indian and Australian customs administrations. And Article 5.13 provides for a joint technical subcommittee on customs procedures and trade facilitation between India and Australia. Australia and India should specifically utilise such mechanisms and forums to increase knowledge sharing, develop fruitful partnerships among stakeholders in India and Australia to navigate their common maritime sector challenges. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. So I just want to note that I've got 3 minutes left, but I'm not going to wait for the platform to disappear or the host to remove me with a hook. I'll conclude ahead of time, and thank you very much for your attention.
You at lunch. Can I have my PowerPoint presentation uploaded, please? Okay. Right. Good morning. Good afternoon. Today we heard about smart ports and smart logistics and all that, but I'm going to introduce you to something smart, which is smarter than all of us. Next slide, please. Okay, so just as an introduction, you have these a few pictures that I want to show on the global smart port market. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is how it's growing. So with the view of commercialization, this is a commercial view that we need to move the ships fast, we need to move the logistics fast. The faster we move, the more money we make. So most of these slides that you see in the first few parts of my presentation is infograms like this. Next slide, please. So as you heard just now on the elements of smart ports, of course, it's an ecosystem. Technology, throughput capacity. Why? Because port operators want to clear stuff as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, here comes the problem with our smart criminals. So as we want to move things fast, it also becomes a hotbed for criminals because they also want to make money. Profit-motivated crime, so they take advantage of these smart ports and start moving criminality and make bigger profits than what the commercial world is doing. Next slide, please. So you see only 2% of the containers are being inspected. Why? Because they don't want to waste time in the port, because port want to move things fast, so they don't want to keep ships on the port to inspect. So law enforcement people have a big headache, because if you stop a ship, then you stop that supply chain. You cannot go to other ports, and then you've disturbed it. And then they will charge you, they will take you to court. They will say you have disrupted my trip and therefore I've incurred losses for that. Next slide, please. I hope you can see. So this is how they use that platform. The ship becomes a criminal platform as it goes to ports. There's so many ways to hide things in the ship, and to do that, a smart port do not have the eyes to see it. Next slide, please. So those who can see, this is a diagram from United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. The number of things that come from containers. It's there. Next slide, please. And these are the things that has been found in containers, that has been cleared from all the X-ray and this and that. Can you see the first one, the one yellow color? The first box. Can anybody guess what that is? Those are breast implants. Breast implants. Marked in the bill of lading, breast implants. And the insects, 50 grams of cocaine injected into the insects. Holy water diluted, fruit juice diluted, plasticine diluted. None of the smart pots can detect this. This one, you need to go back to square one. Smart humans, smart collaboration, and smart intelligence assessment. Next slide, please. So then the United Nations found out about this. We started a program called Container Control Program. Of course, we are only looking at crime, because we look at crime in a box. Because there are other container security initiatives like CSI, which is initiated by the Americans after the 9/11, and that is looking at weapons of mass destruction. So they also have another program. And that one comes under trade, Strategic Trade Act. So I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to cover this. Next slide, please. So in the Indian Ocean, what we do is we collaborate and we collect agencies and work with them, which means these agencies are going and finding out information from freight forwarders, agents, this, that, piecing the dots together, finding out which container is in which part of the ship and where is the ship going. So that when the ship arrives with the container, we allow the container to pass through, and we wait until the container is open, and then we go for the rest, because we want to bust the whole syndicate. The same way the syndicate is making money from the business, we go and bust the syndicate and take all their money back and give it to the agencies. Okay, profit motivated crime. So we go for the money and we send it back. So the agencies are very happy. They get money and they get capacity building from the money. Next slide, please. So this is the story from India, local story. You have this Committee Against Smuggling and Counterfeiting Activities Destroying the Economy. I think this is the only type of organization we have in South Asia. So they went and got some intelligence, went and busted that, and this is what they got. Next slide, please. And look at the consignment. So when a smart port, the systems in the smart ports look at a container, it looks at meat. It will classify as meat because the bill of lading is meat. It cannot differentiate between contraband meat, protected meat, and legitimate meat. When the system looks at liquor, it cannot say it's adulterated liquor. When the system looks at cigarette, it cannot say this is contraband cigarette. So that's a shortcoming of smart ports when it comes to criminality coming in containers. Next slide, please. So this is the list of seizures that has been done under Container Control Program, which means we have a problem. When the smart ports start going big time, we're going to have more smuggling coming through containers and faster contraband and illegal items when you come through containers. I've still not covered human smuggling on containers. I've not covered weapons of mass destruction, centrifugal switches, and missiles in containers. That I'm not covered. I'm only covering these little ones, profit motivated crime, not politically motivated crime or state blah blah blah. Next slide, please. So here is where we need policy intervention. I mentioned yesterday on tabletop exercises, because this is what's lacking when it comes to identifying things like this. We need to conduct an exploratory study on the smart ports. Where are the gaps? How these things can penetrate through not only the system, but also the corrupt system, where the organized crime syndicate can pay millions of dollars to law enforcement agencies, shipping operators, and all that. It's a big business. So, as I was talking to my friends yesterday, when I handle this profit-motivated crime, I look at 3 circles. One circle is how much the government spend on security. The other circle is how much the government lose on taxes and resource and all that. But the best circle is the biggest one. How much the organized crime make in millions of dollars, trillions of dollars. How do you rationalize these three? You cannot, unless you work together. And you need to find out where the holes are to patch. And to do that, you need to work as an organization. You need to be organized against organized crime. What we have is organized crime, disorganized enforcement. So we need to address that. For that, we need to have an exploratory study, and then we engage all our stakeholders. Multi-stakeholder engagement, go through the list. Once we've done that, we conduct capacity building programs, we do tabletop exercises. From there, we identify flow charts. We convert the flow charts into operational plans, and then we are prepared for deterrence. We need to show them that we are smarter than them. We need to show them that we are more organized than organized crime. Only then we can stop this. And for this, you need to identify the supply, the demand and the supply logistics chain. And the strength of this chain, as you know, is the weakest at the weakest link. You just break one link and the whole supply chain is gone. That's all we need. That's all we need. So there is a motivating factor for this. Number one is we losing money on this. We make the money back from them. Number two is it enhances our awareness and it enhances our trade and make sure that only legitimate trade pass through our smart ports. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a wonderful smart conference on variety of ideas pertaining to the maritime sector. And I have the privilege that Captain Martin preceded me, and he has set my task more simpler. So thank you, Martin. The chairperson of the conference, Dr. Vijay Sakhuja, has always been obsessed with many ideas and considers maritime matters. And today, since he is chairing the Smart Port session, smartly he told me that I'm handing you 3 monkeys, play around. Can you do it the most efficient time frame? So I have no choice, I have to agree with that. Thank you very much for the monkeys and the smartness proposition. Globally, I think none of us have any choice. You have to go by the rules of the game. Smart ports, great shipping, and net zero, that's the global future. All the seaports, all the shipping sector, they have to either agree or they better agree. They're the two choices they have. So that's where the market is all about. What is a smart port? That's what our session chair did, or that least possible time, maximum optimization. That's what the smart port all about. Smart port is one that ensures minimal space, minimal time in the port, and they are handling optimization of the money, capital that can be generated with the least possible natural resources, and also it has to be green enough to be allowed to be legal. And that's what the Paris Climate Agreement and all of that is setting the guidelines. So none of us will have in the future. I think if at all we look at Clyde Bank Agreement, they are also setting up that the vessel, the Amazon will be buying goods from vessels that are using only green shipping mode. So the global, there's a whole lot of lobby is there, and that's why. The background is fourth industrial revolution, and climate change diplomacy is so intense. 193 countries in the world have already ratified the treaty, so nobody can escape. That's where we are in, and that's where we have to play around. I teach in an institute which is not a social science institute, it is a science and technology institute. All my students are all engineers. And they come to a very competitive process, and 300,000 people, students apply all over India, and only 3,000 get admission there. So getting in there is a tough task. So naturally, what we get at the human capital in our campus is reasonably, very well, a good human capital. In the course of my teaching, social scientists, negotiating with engineers, and that's where I one day discovered that I have whole lot been re-engineered into a new direction altogether, thanks to my students and those who initiated me into this whole thing. What we need is a base area to talk of where are we working, what is the space, what is the geography, what is the net asset we have, and that's where if you look at it from the east coast of Africa to Australia, this region I have not included Japan or Far East I have not included because we have 40 countries are there, 676 seaports are there, and you can see the ports, they are all color coded. Color coded in a sense they are divided into 5 categories in terms of their scope, size and the scope of their operations and all that. Now these data it is impossible to get. It is there with me because I have tried to indulge myself for the last 6 years working on this and running a data lab where we are mapping all the seaports of the world. So that's where not only the seaports, also we are mapping the real-time basis vessel traffic. If Cochin Port gets any vessel anytime, I get a data in my lab that this is what happened. And that's where if you look at it, there are 37 countries. Out of the 43 countries that are not there, they do not have seaports, they are not coastal. So 37 countries. And Indonesia has the largest number of seaports, followed by Australia and then India and all that. What kind of assets I have, if at all seaports, what type they are. If I simply broadly divide them into the international protocol based division, then you have 5 categories, very large, medium, small and very small categories. And most part of the region's ports are either small or very small. And if I further divide them, it needs to be far more characterized so that we have a clear understanding of the inventory that we have, what kind of assets I have, so that I can imagine what is the possible planning that I can do for us. So if I further go into the characterization, what I get is that how many are river ports, how many are marinas, how many are harbors, how many are deep water ports. All kinds of characterization is also possible there. Not only that, further characterization also can be done. How many are coal, how many of them are handling coal, how many are handling any other special fisheries or many other things. So far more characterization is still needed to be done. And that's where yesterday I think Dr. Sakuja added a good point that geographic clusters also must have to be understood. You have the larger canvas and then you have the clusterized imagination. So if I imagine from the west coast of India, look at West Asia, all the oil supplies are coming from there. If at all I want to interact, and that's where we have the concept of sister ports and port-to-port interactions and interface, and that's where I think small mini way one can be smart enough also to initiate, and there are things that are happening also. If I further look at the east coast of India, then I have the BIMSTEC, and that's also already been discussed about. Then further, if I look at South Africa, I'm working with one of the South African professors, and South Africa is currently experiencing what we call Ocean Pakistan. They also have a maritime modernization program going on. So with Pretoria University, we are also working to look at the possibility of a customs union engagement in South Africa. Then we have recently, I think Ukraine is in the news, and then Chennai port and Vladivostok port in Russia, they have signed a smart port agreement also. So smart port is legally coming to us and also practically also coming to us, and it's also efficient also. The good thing that I enjoyed with Captain Martin's presentation, that it also brings in a lot of challenges that we have to handle in a variety of ways and all that. So to India's, now this is given the limitation of time, I'll just quickly. India is developing Chabahar port in Iran, and the first phase of Chabahar port, it got completed in commissioned in 2017 October, and then Pakistan was not very happy about it. This is what happened to Karachi port in a period of 2 years. That the cargo vessel in Karachi port, we developed Chabahar port. Once that became operational, Karachi port lost 23% business, cargo sector in particular. That's a good story for India. Maritime sector will be happy that I think finally we thought the Pakistanis a lesson without firing a bullet. The other side story is little different. I'm comparing whole of India seaports with Singapore port. Singapore is only one port, and they roughly handle 3,000 vessels every day. And we all together, all the seaports of India, including Cochin Port, we handle roughly around 800 vessels a day. Yeah. That's where we started a crossroad, that we have some good stories, some very, very challenging stories, and that's why we have to negotiate as to where you stand. In the Arabian sector, Arabian sea trade, I have a small window of opening with the WTO, interacting with them of India's west coast, particularly west coast and Saudi Arabia, and that West Asia part of it, if at all there is a possibility of a customs union. So in the process of trying to understand where do we stand, what vessels and kind of things that are happening. If you look at it, UAE has only 9 ports, and they are handling far more vessels than whole of India. And that's 1 year data. So you have number of, in the process, government of India is aware of it, everybody in India knows, those who are the stakeholders. So what India has been doing it 2015 to 2035, what we call it as Sagarmala 2015-2035, it promises 10 million jobs. It tries to create an ecosystem of maritime-led development. The ports are going to be connected, and that's where I think new ideas are coming up. Inland ports, dry ports. Rajasthan is having a port. Jammu and Kashmir is having a port. So port is not necessarily that it has to be near the coast, near the sea. It can be anywhere. So they're all integrations. Sagarmala is a big proposition. Now suddenly smart port concept has come in. We cannot avoid it. So we have to necessarily, whether it is monkey or whatever, we have to carry it. And it has a benefit also. If you carry that, then what you get is that Singapore port alone handles 3,000 vessels a day. All the ports of India together, they handle roughly around 800 vessels. And I used to feel that the Australian ports must be doing pretty well, but that's not the case either. So that's where we need to do it. Government of India is aware, and then last year we had this major ports, Major Ports Act, Major Ports Authorities Act. The seaports, Government of India has taken up, like Goa Port. Now it is no more part of the Goa administration, so the local government cannot mess around with the port and its future planning and all those kind of things. And if at all you achieve a smart port or efficiency of that order, what you get out of it is that your operating cost reduces by 25 to 55%. Vessel handling efficiency also increases by 10 to 35%. Port operating expenses also reduces by 15 to 25%. Naturally, you have the crime or possibility of tampering the whole smart system process itself is also going to be there. Benefits are there, and also chances of, and correspondingly, you have dime a dozen market players who are offering you that invite them, pay them, they'll convert your port into a smart port. So it's a big market itself, and by 2026, now 5.1 billion, and it's growing at a phenomenal 24% growth rate. Along with that, also what is emerging from the climate change side of it is that your vessel movement has to be green enough. That means the alternative energy sources have to be also utilized for vessel traffic, and the business climate is also going to come to terms with that. Only vessels that use green fuel, that means hydrogen or methanol or alternative zero emission vessels or autonomous vessels, whatever format. So that is also growing as another sector where a lot of investment needs to happen. So sum total of the whole thing is that smart port is the idea of it's an idea-based concept. If you employ, you make it efficient. You create efficiency out of your own self. The other side of it, you have no choice but to use green mode of shipping. So all of us, we had a wonderful session on the climate change. All of us, we are sensitive now. You create a green climate also of shipping. So wealth, optimization, and clean environment. So these are what the broad goals of So that's where it's a purely knowledge-driven phenomena, and that's where what I look at is that when I see my students, invariably, all of them begin at the age of 23, they begin with a nearly double the salary of what I am earning today at my age. They begin at that age, that kind of a job profile. And that's where I thought, instead of me teaching them, let us create a two-way traffic. You teach me what is technology, how can I use it, and that's what my lab is all about. And then in the process also, I'm sometimes telling them, I teach a little bit of economics, a little bit of maritime economics also, blue economy and all that. So it is a two-way process that I'm teaching them, also learning from them. Now, now this is, in the process, if you look at all the seaports of India are not bad. This is, I spoke to the chief operating officer of Adani Group of Ports, is a good friend of mine. I think some of the delegates also mentioned Adani Group. Adani Group is a wonder story in India. In Goa, people don't like it because they have a little bit of scandals in terms of coal handling and pollutions and those kind of things. Globally, if you look at it, they operate in India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Australia also. They, the West Coast, they are also managing a port there. And in the context of India, they have developed nearly 24% of India's cargo Adani Group handles. And this is the graph, this is a 14-day graph. And if you see Adani ports versus the Government of India ports, Adani ports are, Hazira port in a period of 14 days is handling more than 1,200 vessels. And in Australia, except Sydney, Adelaide, Darwin, and Brisbane, all of them are nowhere near some of the Adani port groups' performance. And I have also Jakarta port. Jakarta port is doing well, but not the other ports of Indonesia. They are not as efficient. So what you get here is a precise empirical evidence of what's exactly happening, and correspondingly you can work with a drawing board. It gives you the feedback of where you stand, how you propose. And that's where if I look at it, be it Abu Dhabi port or Saudi Arab, all of them, they have entered into smart containerization process, clean energy adoptions. They have a lot of money, so they are doing it themselves. Government of India is trying to do it both from the external sources and from the internal sources under Make in India scheme also. We are now more sensitive, and if at all we can generate the ability from within itself. So pretty conscious of the whole development that's happening. And that's where Adani ports is a good story within the India sports system itself. And Government of Indian ports, I was told, and a number of processes. Now, even if you are in the if you have a smartphone, then you can also monitor. If you are a logistics operator, you can also look at the portal and then see where is your container and all those kind of things. Monitoring is also, we are moving towards a single window process itself. So that's where I think the whole movement. Government of India, I used to feel that the results might not be data, results might not be very impressive. But what I begin to see today, or in the process of realize, India is also waking up in a big way. We are aware of the limitations, challenges, but we are doing the necessary homework towards smart port or be efficient in the international space, and that's where I think the future is heading towards. I have a Goa Maritime Dialogue Forum, and that's where Dr. Vijay Setuja, Professor Lawrence, and a number of them, they have been instrumental in providing the ideas towards that. So periodically we organize some sessions here and there, and these are some of the earlier sessions that we had on that. Thank you very much.
You mentioned some of the green technologies from in terms of fuels, and those are very big and important topics, and I hope we get some chance to discuss those in greater detail in another forum. In my presentation, I'm going to focus more on some of the practical aspects of the digital transformation of ports. I'm also mindful of what the chairperson mentioned at the start, whether the presenters would also look at the resilience and greening of port operations. So if I remember, I'll make sure I mention those as well. When we talk about digital transformation, we are really talking about the change in the jobs, work, and business processes of ports, which are influenced by new technologies. And because we're talking about Industry 4.0, we are talking about Industry 4.0 technologies as well. So in my presentation, I'm going to cover on some practical aspects of what are some of the issues and challenges in going digital, or really in the digital transformation. And I might I'll take a couple of examples as well. I hope you find them useful. I am going to take a supply chain perspective, and that is reflected in the title of the presentation. And the reason for that is because you cannot, in my view, you cannot consider ports in isolation. Ports, if you look at the demand for the port services, the demand arises because there are traders who have decided to engage in trade, and the goods have to be transported. And it just so happens that they have to go to the ports, and certainly ports are very important nodes in the whole supply chain. And they are important because there is a confluence of modes, so truck, rail, barge in some cases, and ocean-going shipping. Plus there is also confluence or convergence. I heard that word today, so I'm going to repeat that. So there's also a convergence of various institutions that are involved, as we are all aware, like customs, quarantine, health authorities, and so on. So all of that makes the ports a very complex place to work. And I was also mindful of what Professor Andrew mentioned. He used the word complex, and some people would even argue that ports behave like complex adaptive systems. But coming back to the practical aspects of my presentation, so briefly, I'm going to talk about taking some examples of the use of technology, Industry 4.0 technologies as tool, because ultimately what matters is how we use those technologies to do what we want to do. The technologies exist. In the scheme of things, as far as port operations are concerned, fitting into the whole supply chain, I think what Industry 4.0 technologies have done is they have given us new ways of collaboration and connectivity. That's a very, very important point, because if you look at a supply chain, why do we use the word chain? Because we are talking about different links. Port is one link. And from the point of view of the traders, from the point of view of the business community, they are interested in the efficiency or whatever they are seeking from the supply chain of the whole chain. And so if one link is not good, that may not suit their purpose. One model doesn't fit all, so I'm going to briefly talk about strategic imperatives as well, and finally finish with the challenges. So we've heard about the various types of technologies, and I'm not going to go through those. They have already been mentioned. But as far as the port operations are concerned and supply chain operations are concerned, I think the Internet of Things is the key defining technology. It also happens to be the predictions that it can lead to. That is what all the people who operate smart ports and supply chain are interested in. And that's where humans can't do it, that's where artificial intelligence comes in. And as far as AI is concerned, machine learning is one of the most exciting things for port and supply chain operations, because it's based on the learning from the trends, from the analysis of big data, and then looking at prediction and forecasting. One of the things that COVID-19 disruptions highlighted was that the supply chains and the people who were engaged in logistics and port operations in those supply chains, who were digitally very well connected and who did have access to artificial intelligence and data analysis capability, they did very well. Why? Because AI was able to tell them, where the disruption might take place, and so their systems, and I'll give you an example of the systems, they could get real-time information, they could make real-time decisions as to send their ship this way, send their containers this way, or in a smaller setting, it might just mean that, just because a truck driver didn't turn up because they were isolating due to COVID, that container hadn't arrived. What do we do next? Well, AI will tell you what you could do. Automation was mentioned, and I think Professor Andrew, you mentioned as well that so far only 3% of the world's terminals, container terminals, have been automated or semi-automated. The world's first fully automated container terminal was actually the Victoria International Container Terminal in Australia. And so I'll talk a little bit about automation as well. But going on to the connectivity and collaboration, I mentioned that I will give you some examples in the time that we've got, probably best to take the examples. One of the low-hanging fruits for ports, but that means one of the easier things to implement, is a port community system. And port community systems have been in practice for a couple of decades, if not more. India, I believe, started implementing the port connectivity system since 2016, at least in the major ports. And though there is a lot of difference between one port community system and the other, the main thing that a port community system does is that it provides a platform for exchange of information from all the people who are somehow connected with everything that happens to the cargo or the goods when they pass through a port. And what it does is that it reduces the margin for error, because instead of numerous parties and numerous people entering data, container number this, blah, 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 and every time the container passes through, say, a gate or something happens to it, it's placed in a bay or a place in the port, all that information can be updated and added on. So, without having to enter that information again. There is constant updates and improvement of data. And as you can see from this very simple figure, now you see it. So as you can see from this very simple figure, it mentions the key layers there, like the shipping agency, the shipping lines themselves, the terminal operators, customs, and so on. These have really made the life for people like freight forwarders very simple. For example, instead of having to put a separate customs declaration, the information from there can automatically go into whatever system the customs authority use. So they have all the data, all the containers and so on. But if you look at this slide, there's two things I want you to look at. One is right on top, and it says freight forwarder, and the arrows going to exporter, importer, and at the bottom you've got the terminal operator. And essentially what that indicates is that these parties themselves have their own systems as well, and those systems have to be integrated as well. In the 3 minutes, I cannot give you examples of those systems, so I will just go through, but if you have time, at least Google for the DHL Global Forwarding case study. That's a very interesting one, and that'll be your homework. I'll go on to just the last two slides here. And one is that one model doesn't fit. We know what the technologies are, but ports are different. So while we can compare one port to the other, we can compare JNPT, for example, with Singapore, the ports have different function. Singapore, which is a transshipment port, it needs to invest in ship-to-shore cranes that can bring containers very fast in and go out. Whereas the gateway ports like JNPT or Shenzhen, and they need not, because they have to rely on internet connectivity as well. The other thing to consider is the supply chain orientation, which will affect what type of smartness the port needs to display. So just to give you a very quick example, and I'll draw a comparison between Port Botany, which is the port for Sydney, and JNPT. You look at Port Botany and the import containers that are coming in to Port Botany, 80% of those containers, they are stripped within 40 kilometers from the port. So there is no incentive for the port to have very efficient systems, interland transport and so on. If you look at JNPT, and JNPT's interland goes up to Dadri, Delhi, the north of North India. So you require that connectivity, that industrial corridor. Efficiency of that corridor would affect the port as well. The last slide I basically want to mention here is that, when we talk about digital transformation challenges, for the policymakers, the challenges are that there is always the issue of what jobs might go if we automate. That's for the policymakers to decide. There is also the trade-off between efficiency and resilience, because efficiency and resilience don't go together. So resiliency generally depends on having redundancy in the system, whereas efficiency doesn't. Cyber security is a big issue because when you're talking about connectedness, there is more chance for hacking and so on. One of the most famous example was in 2016 when the world's then biggest shipping line, Maersk Line, got hacked, and people walked into their office and suddenly the screens were blank. And it's estimated that they lost about $600 million or it cost them $600 million. Other challenges that you can think of are things such as, okay, if you're going for smart ports, smart supply chains, you have to skilled people. That's where the universities and so on have to be very proactive because it'll take 3, 4, 5 years before you can have those people, the data analysts, the engineers, and the management people who can handle technology. Like somebody once mentioned, technology is easy. It's the people who are the hard ones to get through. So, and finally, who benefits, who pays? Is it the government? Governments are mainly interested in the external costs, like the costs of due to pollution and so on, whereas businesses aren't. So these are some of the questions, and I'm sorry I couldn't finish saying what I wanted to do, but hopefully I finished in time. Thank you very much.